Good evening to you. It is time to begin our Wednesday night Bible study. Once again, we are operating remotely. We are not in the building. They have started in the abatement process at the church building in the lobby, and which, of course, because it had a little asbestos in it, has affected the entire building. So we are not there at this time. But I'm glad you're where you are tonight, wherever you are in the world. If you are watching and listening with us this evening or tomorrow morning, if you're in Asia or in Australia or in Africa, perhaps it's early in the morning, I'm glad you're here. We are going to start in just a few moments. You want to get your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. That's where we'll be in just a couple of minutes, looking at 1 Samuel chapter 1. And before we start, I want to talk about some of our people that are on our prayer list still that we're concerned about. First of all, good news, Randall Harris went home yesterday or Monday and is doing very, very well at home. As Carla said, he's really happy to be there and doing extremely well. We're thankful for that. Also, Snooki will be getting out on Friday. She will be released on Friday through 3 weeks of physical therapy, and we're thankful that she is doing much better. We look forward to seeing her, and hopefully she can be out Sunday with us. She'll probably want me and Jamie to go out to eat with her Friday night. She likes to go out to eat. She hadn't done that in about a month. She'll probably be ready to do that, and we'll certainly be ready to do that with her. I would remind you that also Sarita is still in NHC. She is making progress, getting stronger. Buddy is still at home, and Buddy and Michael, I appreciate greatly your help and your sacrifice in getting food to them. I'm so thankful for that, and certainly my new friend that I've just gotten to know, Dina Brandon, has really been a huge help to us. She takes care of getting him breakfast in the mornings and getting his meds started for him, and he's doing very, very well. So we're thankful for that. But I'm thankful you're here. Remember Mitzi, as always. Otelia is still in the nursing home and will be probably. But remember her. I know that Jason and Caroline have gotten the last couple of Sundays to go out and to see them and to visit with them, to take Michael, and we're thankful for that. We've covered Judges and Ruth, and now we're going to kind of continue in 1 Samuel because it kind of wraps up, puts a wrap and closes up, puts a bow on top of the story of the Judges. And as we look at this, I want you to follow along and to read ahead, because a lot of this will be tying all together. The first few chapters, 8 chapters, so we're going to deal with Samuel, the namesake of the book. He's a very, very important character. We talked about him last week, talked about the general introduction to him last week. Today we want to take a look at more specifically the text in it. It starts off, and I've had a little voice issues, so I'm going to let the reading come out of the first 8 verses, come out of the New American Standard Bible, and we're going to read verses 1 through 8 of 1 Samuel chapter 8.
The New American Standard Bible. Copyright by the Lehman Foundation. 1 Samuel chapter 1. Now there was a certain man from Ramathaim-Zophim, from the hill country of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man would go up from his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord there. When the day came that Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and her daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival, however, would provoke her bitterly to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. If Year after year, as often as she went up to the house of the Lord, he would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? Then Hannah rose after.
We pause there, we see, and we're introduced to the first characters in the book. And of course, that's Elkanah and his two wives, Hannah, who's going to become a much more central character in the book, and Peninnah. And they are an interesting couple, of course, as we see that. But before we get into them, we'll talk about where they're from. They're from Ramoth Zophim, and there's 8 places in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, named Ramah of some sort, or Ramah of some sort. And most of them are within 8 or 10 miles of Jerusalem. There's really not enough information to know exactly which one we're talking about there. Now, it says that Elkanah was an Ephraimite from the sense that he lived in the hill country of the tribe of Ephraim. Now, as we look at that, and as we think about that, we need to remember that as a Levite, because his ancestry is given in 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 33, but even the very name Elkanah identifies him as a Levite, because all the Elkanahs in the Old Testament, with one exception, are Levites, and it was a name used by the Korahites, which was a division of the sons of Levi, to which Samuel would belong to. Now, being in Ephraim, that just meant that's where he lived. He, as you know from your study in Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus, the Levites did not receive an inheritance in the promised land, but they lived there and they had cities in each of the tribes. And that's what we think with was going on there is how Elkanah was known as an Ephraimite. He was not of that tribe. He was a Levite. Hannah, and he had 2 wives. Now, as he had 2 wives here, you've got to think about, and it must not, you don't need to think that because so many of the Old Testament history heroes, that they were polygamous. They had more than one wife, had multiple wives. Don't think because of that, that's something that God approved of or God endorsed. It was never the will of God. Jesus makes that very clear in Matthew chapter 19, verses 3 through 9. From the beginning, this was God's plan. And the example here in the case of Elkanah is another example of the unhappiness and the strife that normally resulted from a man having 2 or more wives. It says this man used to go up year by year to worship at Shiloh. Now, this meant that he was probably going up, most tend to believe that he would go up for the Feast of Tabernacles. And it said he would go up to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts. The name of God with variations is found, this name of God is found 260 times in the Old Testament. But this is the first mention of it, first time it's used. So there's some scholarly debate and discussion over what the name means, but it doesn't really matter. What we need to know is that he is recognizing God there. It's said that he went up to Shiloh. Now, Joshua had removed the ark from Gilgal and moved it to Shiloh, which happened to be a town in his tribe, which is about 10 miles south of Shechem. Again, I guess if you were Joshua, you were in control and you got to move and set up the tabernacle where you could defend it and where it would be close to you. And it doesn't hurt to be in your own territory as well. Now, it goes on further and he states that where Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas were priests to the Lord. Now, these 3, Eli had not retired, but at that time as high priest, but he turned over much of the duties to his sons. His sons, as we're going to find out later, were unscrupulous, they were immoral, they were dishonest, they were about everything that you would not want a priest to be, but they were. Now, It says he gave, some versions say he gave Hannah one portion because the Lord had closed her womb. Some versions say that he gave a double portion. And I tend to lean on the side, come down after reading a number of commentaries, I come down on the side of saying it probably was worthy or double, which is what the Hebrew word means, worthy or a double portion, for this reason, because an act like that by Elkanah would partially explain Peninnah's her conduct. She was angry at her husband because he was given to this wife after she had given him sons and daughters. He was giving this wife a double portion. And to me, that makes sense. Now, as you continue reading along, it says that worshipers were permitted to feast on the peace offerings after the priests had taken out their portions. The priests got a portion. That's one of the ways in which they were provided for by God. And the event mentioned here was that of the parceling out of the food to the individuals. Peninnah and her children received many portions, and Hannah, despite Elkanah's love for Hannah, she would have only received one portion, but it says he gave her a double portion, which made Peninnah jealous and really caused a lot of strife. Hannah's weeping was evidently before that. She'd seen Peninnah's jealous and unfeeling conduct toward her as she taunted her. Now, there's a lot of things that you could make fun of someone about that would be perhaps funny to somebody. But I don't know anybody that thinks it would be funny, particularly in those ancient times, to make fun of a woman who could not have children. And apparently, the indication is, the context is, that she taunted her, especially during these periods of annual worship at Shiloh. So some think, in fact, that Hannah was so upset about this taunting that she even could not eat until she went back into the tabernacle for prayer. That seems to be a logical way to look at it. For me, it makes a lot of sense. And so that leads us up to the point where we get into verse 9, and we're going to see Hannah's prayer now. And again, I'll go back to the reading and let the reader take over again. And now Hannah has just rose after eating and drinking.
Eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She, greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, your maidservant to remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. Now it came about as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli was watching her mouth. As for Hannah, she was speaking in her heart, only her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Then Eli said to her, How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you. But Hannah replied, No, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition, which you have asked of him. She said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Then they arose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord.
Okay, so now you see the scene in verse 9 continues. She, after they had eaten and drank in Shiloh, now that suggests that some commentators think, and it makes sense to me, that this phrase might mean after the meal had started, that Hannah interrupted her meal. She was so upset she couldn't even eat to make her appeal to God. And the Septuagint added the word, she arose and stood before the Lord, indicating that she made her prayer out of a standing position, a bit of information that seems borne out by Hannah's reference as we read, if we get down to verse 26. She basically here is going to pray to God and say, if you'll give me a child, just give me a child, no razor shall touch his head. From this, we may, I think, safely conclude that she was promising that he was going to be a Nazarite for life. But now, that being said, Samuel's ability to prophesy, his right to prophesy, in fact, and the sincerity by which he could do it and the power which commandments even to kings did not derive from what Eli had promised him here, but solely by his being directly called by the Lord to his prophetic office that he would later fill. And it says Eli was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Now, there's a couple of things there we want to notice about that. The seat mentioned there was probably some type of considered to be a holy or a place of importance to sit right inside the tabernacle, the entrance of the inner court of the tabernacle. Now, some would say, it says right there, the temple of the Lord. Well, we know the temple wasn't built by Solomon yet. There was got to be, 2 more kings and then half of Solomon's reign before it's built. But if you read through the Old Testament, the word temple and tabernacle is used very frequently. Temple is used to refer to tabernacle. A great example of that is in the book of Psalms. David refers repeatedly to the temple when he knew it wasn't built yet. Obviously, he knew it wasn't built, but it was the dwelling place of God. Now, as Eli walks in and observes this, he sees Hannah standing, and she's praying, but her lips are moving, but no words are coming out. Now, it appears from that obviously Eli thought Hannah was a drunk woman. Now, that would put in context to say that apparently drunkenness at the temple must have been, and a number of commentators said it, and I again tend to fall on this side with them, that it was a rather common occurrence for people to get drunk during these festivals, or else Eli, why would he have so readily accused Hannah with these very harsh and judgmental words? I mean, to call a woman who's there to worship a drunk is a pretty strong thing to do. But it's she's praying, and apparently most of the time the prayers were done out loud, but she did hers quietly. And Eli listened to her explanation. She says, I'm not drunk. I haven't touched any wine, but I will tell you, here's what's going on. I need a child. And if God will give me a child, here's what I'll do. I'll give him to God the rest of his life. Once he's weaned, I'll bring him to God, and he'll be there and serve God the rest of his days. And he'll be a Nazarite. He won't have his hair cut. He won't drink strong wine. Well, after hearing this, Eli is touched by this, and he sees her sincerity, sees her position, and he says, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition. Now, this response from Eli came after Hannah explained to the high priest, to Eli, his mistake. And we view this sentence from the lips of Eli. He's there as not just talking to her, but it's a prayer to God, and not merely what we might consider a wish that God would answer Hannah's prayer. But the proof of this is seen in verse 18, I think, very clearly, because Hannah was no longer sad. The prayer of Eli, the high priest of Israel, and the judge of Israel himself was the factor, I believe. A number of commentators feel the same. That's where I got the idea from. I didn't think it up myself, but I do think it's right, that this is what changed Hannah's attitude. He looked at her and he said, I prayed to God about it basically today. I've asked God to do this for you. And I feel certain he's going to. Let's pick back up with reading in verse 19 now.
Lord, and returned again to their house. But in due time, after Hannah had conceived, that she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel, saying, because I have asked him of the Lord.
Because I've asked him of the Lord. Verse 19, 20, and 20, and 19 and 20. We're going to see the birth of Samuel. A number of excellent scholars tell us that the name Samuel does not mean ask of the Lord. Now, a lot of people in a lot of study Bibles, they declare that very clearly in a footnote at the bottom, things like that. But in reading through and in studying, I think that basically there is some connection, whatever the truth of it is. The Bible really doesn't say it, but I think there is enough in Scripture to say there must be some connection between the name Samuel and Hannah's name declared reason for giving it. Now in verse 21, we're going to get down to where Samuel is going to be presented to the Lord at Shiloh. Beautiful, beautiful words here, beautiful passage here, and what beautiful thoughts here of a woman who is now she's going to give up what she asked for the most, what she wanted the most. She's going to give that up to God, as it will, after just a few years of having the child as an infant. She's going to give that child to God. Let's go back, and you get back and you look, and he says, Elkanah and all his house went up to pay his vow. Well, first of all, Elkanah now said, this is my vow too. He's taken ownership of the vow also. We also see that Hannah said, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go back up. But when I go, I won't bring Samuel back. After he's weaned, I'm going to leave him there. And he's going to be dedicated to the Lord the rest of his life. Right now, I think the tornado warning is going off. So, not the warning, but the tornado rehearsal they do once a month. I think that's what it is. The tornado siren's going off. But we don't have a tornado right now. We're safe from that. But she said, as soon as the child is weaned, I'll bring him to the Lord, dedicate him to the Lord. Now, we learn from, if you read it, it's not inspired, but from 2 Maccabees 7, verse 27, it says, the weaning time for children in Palestine and the Mideast was a period of 2 or often 3 years. So this was a very young child. You see the sacrifice that's going to be made right here by Hannah. She's taking what she had prayed for, what she desired more than anything, and she's going to dedicate that child. And she's going to turn that child over to the service of God. Now, so many times in our lives, when we pray for things, when we get them, the last thing we're going to do is give them to anybody else. We're not going to share them with anybody else. We've seen that in children. We've seen that in a number of things. And so here this probably 3-year-old child is turned over to Samuel or to Eli, and he's going to be serving in the tabernacle. We're going to see next chapter that Mama's going to see him every year and is going to take care of him, going to stay involved in his life. And we're also going to see that God is going to answer that gift. God, because she kept her word, because she gave that gift to God, God is going to come back in and God's going to reward her with more children. So we'll see that as that comes up. So she took him up along with her, and she's going to make the trip when he's probably 3 years old. And she makes the trip to Shiloh, and because we've already established in 1 Samuel chapter 3, and then in verse 1, chapter 1 and verse 3, and chapter 1 and verse 21, that Elkanah and his whole house make these yearly pilgrimages. Now, though, in this particular trip, Hannah is going to be the primary actor. She's going to be the one that's center stage right now. She's going to be the one that all the focus is on. Now, a number of commentators, the Revised Standard says, took a 3-year-old bull. But the Hebrew clearly states 3 bulls, not a 3-year-old bull, but 3 1-year-old bulls. And there's no reason why that would have any doubt to that. The argument that only 1 bull was brought is probably based upon the argument in 1 Samuel 1 and verse 25, where it says they killed the bull. They slaughtered the bull. But I think Keel in his commentary gives me the clearest understanding of the passage. He says the bull mentioned in 1 Samuel 1 and verse 25 was a sacrifice connected with the presentation of Samuel to the Lord. The other 2 were probably bought on to pay as it were, the sacrifice for the 2 years that Hannah didn't come while Samuel's being weaned. Now, these facts were the facts that the author of 1 Samuel didn't think he was necessary to mention, because it's implied in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 3, and from the keeping of the law of Moses, what was commanded to do at these annual sacrifices. And then it says that she brought up an ephah of flour. An ephah is about 3/5 of a bushel. She could have brought a bushel. Some versions say a bushel. It doesn't matter. The bottom line was she brought a very generous sacrifice of wheat also to go with it. And then she begins to explain who she was. She said, I am the woman who was standing there. And she said, who stood beside you praying to the Lord. Now, the Old Testament reveals no fixed position as a requirement for prayer. Some laid down prostrated fully before the Lord. Some were kneeling. Some were lifting up their hands. Some lifted their eyes or both toward heaven and stand there, all mentioned in the Old Testament. We find one prayer in the Bible that I'm pretty sure that he wasn't doing any of these 3. I think Jonah's position in the belly of the great fish was not any of these. But she says, she was standing there, I was standing there, and she identifies what she was doing. Now, as you think about the last couple of verses here, beautiful verses, they've been quoted many times. They're in several of my children's homes. For this child I've prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I ask of him. She says, restating to Eli, look, this is the boy that I promised. I promised he would come, and here I brought him. I've kept my word. I prayed for him. God has given me this child, and now I'm going to dedicate him to you. So also in verse 28, so now I've dedicated him to the Lord, and as long as he lives, he is going to be dedicated to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. Now, you see there a completed picture of a woman who took the sacrifice She went to God and said, God, I'm going to make this offering. Here's what I want you to do. Please give me a child. I'm praying for a child. And if you give me that child is going to be dedicated to serving you the rest of their life. And that's what he did. He did there. He dedicated that child. She dedicated that child to serving God the rest of their life. What a great sacrifice it was. But what a blessing it was to her, because as we're going to see in coming chapters, we see in later chapters, we're going to see that God is going to repay her gift many times over. She's going to have multiple sons and daughters. And she's going to keep in touch with him. She's going to give him the little ephod, the little robe every year. We'll see just a beautiful story develop here. So I hope that you'll go ahead and you'll read ahead in looking ahead at the story of Samuel. Now, what a beautiful story. Elkanah and Hannah and their love for God and their love for their new son, and how that translated into a love for God and showing that love for God. The thing they desired the most, the thing they wanted the most, the thing they asked for the most, they were willing to give to God. What a great, great story 1 Samuel chapter 1 is. Again, I want to remind you that next Sunday, this coming Sunday, we'll be meeting in the we'll be meeting in the Civic Center again, Bible class at 9:30, worship at 10:30. We invite you to join us for that. If you can't be there in person, we will be online. We'll be restreaming it the same way, the same places here. And I want to remind you again of that. Right now, remember, we love you. God loves you. We look forward to being with you. And the star of the show has reappeared. My granddaughter has reappeared. My oldest granddaughter doesn't seem to want to slide into the picture. But there's Ellie. Ellie's going to slide in. We'll listen to a little music now and we'll wrap up our study tonight. Thank you so much for being with us. God bless you. Have a good one. This is a cute little baby. Cute little thing. 6 others were this one. She's best natured thing, I tell you. She's good natured, happy little thing. I think that's a pretty wonderful thought to go off on. I will meet you there. God bless you and have a good week. And I'll see you, Lord willing, in the morning at 7 o'clock if you'd like.